They say words are just words, but when they come from someone in power, they can shape perceptions, shift alliances, and shake the world. So when Governor Walz made a few comments about China, some called it bold, others called it naive. But I couldn't help but ask, do we truly understand the weight of what was said? Or are we just repeating headlines because what we say, especially in today's world, doesn't stay in our own backyard? It echoes across borders, across cultures, and across minds already full of fear and assumptions. They say words are powerful, but in politics, they're everything. They can start a movement or a war. They can build bridges or burn them. They can bring healing to a nation or divide it in ways that take generations to repair. Sometimes all it takes is one sentence, one soundbite, one press conference, and suddenly the world is watching, reacting, judging. Not always with full understanding, but always with strong opinions. And that's the thing about politics. It's not just about policies and plans. It's about how those plans are presented, how leaders speak to their people, how they speak about other people, especially those beyond their own borders. Because when someone in power speaks, the words they choose are never just casual. They become headline, they become history. And often they shape how people feel about their future, about their fears, about each other. That's a lot of weight to carry with every word. But some forget that. Or maybe they underestimate it. In a world so hungry for sound bites and viral moments, some leaders fall into the trap of speaking before thinking. They say what feels good in the moment, what earns applause, what gets attention, without stopping to ask, will this help or will this harm? It's easy to throw out statements about other nations, to make bold claims, to point fingers, to act like we know exactly what's happening across the world. But real leadership, the kind that brings people together, demands more than just a loud voice. It demands wisdom, restraint, and the humility to admit when we don't know everything. Because behind every country is a people. Behind every policy is a purpose. And behind every headline is a history most of us haven't taken the time to understand. So when a politician carelessly labels another nation or makes sweeping generalizations about a culture or speaks from assumption instead of knowledge, it's not just risky. It's dangerous. Because people believe them. People trust them. And when they speak in ways that simplify, demonize, or polarize, those words don't just stay in the room. They travel, they multiply, and they often do more damage than anyone expected. But here's what's even more important to remember. Words can also heal. They can acknowledge the pain of the past while pointing to a hopeful future. They can bridge cultures, clarify confusion, calm the fears of the people, inspire real, honest conversations, the kind that move us forward, not backwards. That's what we need more of. We need leaders who don't speak just to defend their position, but to uplift the people they serve. Leaders who choose their words with care, because they know words can either lead or mislead, either educate or manipulate. And we as citizens, we have a part to play too. Let's stop just repeating what we hear. Let's ask more questions. Let's study, research, listen to more than one side. Let's be slower to judge and quicker to seek understanding. Because when we hold our leaders accountable for their words, they're reminded that they don't speak for themselves alone. They speak for their country, for the people, for peace. The power of words isn't just in how they're said, it's in what they produce. Do they stir hate or hope? Do they blind us or open our eyes? Do they divide or bring people to the table? We all want a better future. But a better future doesn't start with better weapons or louder microphones. It starts with better words, spoken with truth, with heart, and with a clear understanding that the world is listening. And maybe, just maybe, if we can be thoughtful with our words, we can finally begin to heal what careless voices have broken. Because in the end, it's not just what you say that matters. It's what your words leave behind. We live in a world that moves fast, where opinions are formed in seconds, and conclusions are drawn even before the full picture is known. One of the biggest examples of this is how we talk about countries we don't live in, cultures we don't understand, and people we've never met, especially when it comes to China. So many are quick to define China in a sentence. Some call it a threat, others see it as a rising power that must be feared. There are those who believe it's playing a long game to dominate the world. And there are those who think it's misunderstood, misjudged, and misrepresented. But the truth? It's rarely that simple. China is not just a political headline or a single policy. It's over 1 billion people with thousands of years of history, culture, struggle, and strength. It's a nation that has grown rapidly in a matter of decades, economically, technologically, and diplomatically. So, and like every country, it has both its light and its shadows. Understanding China's global stance means looking beyond what the news tells us. It means removing the fear lens and putting on the lens of curiosity. The kind of curiosity that doesn't look to agree or disagree, but simply wants to know the deeper truth. Because yes, China is asserting itself on the world stage. Yes, it's building alliances, investing in regions where others haven't. Yes, it's expanding its influence through trade, infrastructure, and soft power. But are these actions always signs of aggression? Or could they be signs of a country trying to protect its own future, just like every other nation does? It's easy to label, harder to understand. And maybe that's the heart of the issue. It's easier to believe that someone is an enemy than to accept that maybe they just have a different way of doing things. Different doesn't always mean dangerous. Sometimes it just means different. The mistake we make is when we assume that China's actions are always hostile or harmful without understanding the why behind them. Why are they investing so heavily in certain parts of the world? Why are they strengthening their military, their economy, their identity? Could it be that they are simply trying to never again be humiliated or left behind like they once were? Every country has a story of pain, and pain shapes posture. Maybe some of China's boldness today comes from the shadows of yesterday, from a deep desire to be respected, to be seen, to be heard. But when we only look at the headlines, when we let politics paint the full picture for us, we miss the human side of the story. It's not about being blind to China's actions. No one is saying to ignore real concern. Every country should be held accountable for how it treats its people and others. But understanding doesn't mean agreeing. It means making space for complexity. That's what's missing in so many conversations today. Space. Space to pause. To ask instead of accuse. To learn instead of label. If we took that approach, maybe we'd see that some of what China is doing is no different than what many powerful nations have done before, pursuing what's best for their own survival, sometimes at a cost, sometimes with intention, sometimes out of fear. The question is, are we willing to look deeper, or are we too comfortable with the idea of a villain? Because if we're being honest, having a villain makes things easier. It gives us someone to blame. It justifies our own mistakes. It rallies people behind a cause. But the real world doesn't work that way. It's messy, complicated, and full of stories that we'll never fully know. So before we accept the next bold statement about China, before we repeat the words of a politician who may or may not have the full picture, maybe we should slow down and listen. Listen not just to the voices we're used to, but also to the ones we've ignored. Because understanding is never about choosing a side, it's about choosing to see clearly. We don't need more fear, we need more wisdom. We don't need more noise, we need more truth. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find it when we stop looking at nations as enemies and start looking at them as people. People with dreams, pain, and purpose, just like us. Some people think leadership is about power, about titles, about being the loudest voice in the room. But real leadership, the kind that leaves a legacy, it's about wisdom, especially when it comes to the words we speak. Because the truth is, the world is listening, not just to what leaders say, but how they say it. The tone, the timing, the intention behind every word. A single sentence can spark fear, spread division, or stir hope. One wrong word can light fires that take years to put out. One wise word can calm storms before they even begin. That's how powerful speech can be when it comes from someone in authority. When a leader speaks, they don't just speak for themselves. They speak for the people they represent. They speak on behalf of a nation, a culture, a vision. That's why words must be chosen with care, not to manipulate, not to impress, but to build understanding and peace. It's easy to speak with emotion. It's much harder to speak with wisdom. Especially when the world is moving so fast. Social media pressures leaders to react before reflecting. The cameras are always rolling, the headlines are waiting, and sometimes, in the rush to say something, anything, the truth gets lost. But great leaders don't just speak to be heard. They speak because there's something worth saying. Wisdom doesn't shout. It doesn't seek attention. It speaks when necessary and remains silent when speaking will only cause more harm. It asks, is this true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? And is it the right? And these questions matter even more when tensions are high, when the world is watching, when people are hurting or afraid. Because in those moments, people don't need drama. They need direction. They don't need panic. They need perspective. Leadership isn't about always having the perfect answer. It's about having the humility to say, let me understand before I respond. Let me learn before I lead others into something they don't fully see. Sometimes leaders make bold claims about other nations, other cultures, other people without truly knowing the full picture. And when that happens, they don't just damage their own credibility, they put others at risk. They risk trust, relationships, peace. That's why wisdom is not just a quality, it's a responsibility. Because real leadership understands the cost of careless words. It doesn't speak just to provoke or to score political points. It speaks to inspire, to guide, to unite. We've seen what happens when wisdom is missing in leadership. We've seen how lies dressed up as confidence can lead people down the wrong path. How arrogance can sound like certainty when repeated often enough. How crowds can be swayed not by truth but by volume. But truth doesn't need to shout. Wisdom doesn't need to win every argument. What it needs is to be present in every conversation that matters, especially in a world full of opinions, where leaders are under constant pressure to take sides, to speak first, to be bold without thinking. We need those who will pause long enough to think deeply. We need those who will value discernment over drama. We need those who will choose the long-term good over the short-term praise. And maybe that's the quiet strength we've forgotten. Because leadership is not just about moving forward, it's about making sure we don't hurt others along the way. It's about speaking truth without causing unnecessary harm. It's about guiding people with clarity, not confusion. In the end, the words of a leader don't fade quickly. They echo. They echo in the hearts of their people. They echo in the actions that follow. They echo in the way the world responds. So let them echo wisdom. Let them echo peace. Let them echo grace. Because in times of uncertainty, we don't just need leaders with big plans. We need leaders with big hearts. The kind of hearts that know when to speak and when to listen. And that kind of leadership, it's not just remembered. It's trusted. We live in a time when information is everywhere. News alerts pop up on our phones before we even finish our morning coffee. Headlines scroll across screens faster than we can read them. And social media? It turns whispers into wildfire in minutes. But in this flood of updates and opinions, it's getting harder and harder to know what's real and what's just being sold to us. Because let's be honest, not everything that's loud is true. Not everything that's trending is right. And sometimes the truth is buried under layers of clicks, drama, and carefully edited stories. That's the difference between media and reality. Media is a lens, and not all lenses are clear. Some are cracked, some are tinted, some are designed to highlight only the parts of the story that keep people watching. And when the goal becomes keeping attention instead of telling the whole truth, something very dangerous happens. we stop seeing the full picture. We see quotes pulled out of context, moments frozen in time that don't tell us what happened before or what came after. We see images designed to trigger emotion, not understanding. We see headlines that sound alarming but are often missing one thing, the full story. And when that happens over and over again, we start forming opinions not from knowledge but from fragments, from assumptions, from whatever angle the media chooses to show us that day. But real life isn't a headline. Real people aren't villains or heroes in a movie script. Real situations are complex, and most of the time, the truth sits somewhere in the middle, between two extremes, between what was said and what was meant, between what we think we know and what we've never even considered. This is especially true when it comes to global issues. Countries like China, for example, are often portrayed in one-dimensional ways. We're told they're a threat, a rival, an enemy. But are we told about their perspective, their reasons, their internal challenges? They're people, the ones who wake up, go to work, raise families, and dream like everyone else? Media doesn't always give us that. Not because all journalists are bad, but because the system rewards speed, not depth. It rewards drama, not nuance. It rewards outrage, not understanding. And so we have a choice. We can let media shape our view of the world, or we can take responsibility for searching deeper, for reading beyond the headline, for asking harder questions, for listening to voices that aren't always handed a microphone. Because reality is not always found in what's reported. Sometimes it's found in what's left out. That's why discernment matters more now than ever. The ability to pause and say, is this the full story? Who's telling it, and what might they be leaving out? That kind of mindset doesn't make us skeptical, it makes us wise. And wisdom protects us from being manipulated by fear or led by half-truths. Because fear sells, outrage sells. But understanding, that takes effort. It takes heart. It takes a willingness to admit that sometimes we've only seen one side. So the next time we hear something on the news that sparks a strong reaction, whether it's about politics, war, leadership, or a foreign nation, maybe we shouldn't just react. Maybe we should reflect. Maybe we should ask ourselves, what don't I know yet? What might I be missing? Because the truth isn't always where the cameras are pointing. Sometimes it's in the quiet places, the conversations that never make the news, the people who don't go viral but carry wisdom the world needs. And when we commit to seeking that truth, not the one wrapped in ratings or packaged for clicks, that's when we start to see clearly. That's when media loses its power to divide, and we gain the power to discern, to think, to understand. The world doesn't need more opinions, it needs more clarity, more heart, more people willing to look beyond the noise and truly listen. Because only then can we begin to live not by what we're told, but by what we've taken the time to truly know. In today's world, it feels like choosing a side has become more important than seeking the truth. Every conversation, every debate, every headline pushes us to pick a team, this or that, left or right, for or against. And somewhere in all this noise, we've forgotten the power of discernment. Because discernment doesn't shout, it doesn't rush to conclusions, it doesn't need a side to belong to. It sits quietly, listens fully, thinks deeply, and most importantly, it seeks truth over trend. But let's face it, it's easier to divide than to discern. Division is loud. It demands reaction. It thrives on assumptions and labels. And in a world addicted to fast information and faster judgment, division feels natural. It gives us someone to blame. It makes us feel like we're doing something, even when we haven't taken the time to understand. But discernment, that's different. It asks us to slow down, to look at more than one perspective, to pause before we speak, and to resist the urge to turn every disagreement into a battlefield. Discernment is patient. And in a time like this, where nations are clashing, where people are polarized, where one wrong word can go viral in seconds, patience is power. Discernment doesn't mean being silent. It means speaking with clarity, not chaos. It means saying what's right even when it's not popular, but doing so with a heart that desires peace, not pride. Because what the world needs right now isn't more division, it's more understanding. We don't need to agree on everything to respect each other. We don't have to share the same views to share the same humanity. And we definitely don't need to cancel or condemn people just because they see the world differently. But that's the habit we've fallen into, isn't it? Someone says something we don't like, and instead of asking why, instead of leaning in and trying to understand, we label them. We push them away. We treat them like the enemy. And the danger in that, we stop listening. We stop learning, and we begin to live in bubbles where we only hear what we already believe, and we never grow beyond what's comfortable. But discernment, real discernment, invites us into discomfort. It invites us to listen even when it's hard, to sit with tension instead of running from it, to ask deeper questions, not because we're trying to win an argument, but because we're trying to get to the truth, even if that truth is inconvenient. Especially when it comes to how we view other people, other cultures, other nations. It's easy to create enemies out of people we don't know. It's easy to assume the worst about a country or a leader or a movement when we've only heard one side of the story. But what if we chose to be people of discernment instead? People who ask, what's really going on here? What do I need to understand before I react? What might be true that I haven't yet considered? Because discernment doesn't divide, it connects. It says, let me understand your story before I judge your actions. It says, there may be more to this than I see. It says, peace is worth pursuing, even if it takes effort. This kind of mindset doesn't make us weak. It makes us wise. It makes us mature. And in a world where shouting matches have replaced conversations, that kind of maturity is rare and powerful. Imagine if more people chose discernment over division. Imagine if leaders paused to think before they spoke. If media platforms elevated facts over fear. If everyday people, like you and me, made the decision to lean into dialogue instead of conflict. What kind of world would that be? A better one, a safer one, a world not built on noise, but on understanding. So let's be bold, not in picking sides, but in seeking truth. Let's be strong, not in arguing, but in listening. And let's be wise, not in tearing others down, but in building bridges wherever we can. Because peace isn't found in who shouts the loudest, it's found in those who have the courage to quiet the noise and choose discernment, even when the world demands division. At the end of the day, this isn't just about Governor Walz. This is about all of us. Leaders, followers, citizens, viewers. We all have a responsibility to think before we speak, to learn before we lead, to ask before we assume. Because if we want to build a world that understands each other, then we must first choose to be the ones who try to understand. Let's not settle for surface-level opinions. Let's dive deeper. Let's seek clarity, not conflict. Wisdom, not war. And truth, not just trending topics. Because the world is already divided enough. Let's be the voice that brings sense, not just sound.